And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex and I are joined by Josh Margolis, who is an intern for both of us on the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. Josh did some really fine work this week up in his home state of Minnesota, talking with Indiana commit Race Thompson, as well as Race's AAU teammate Matt Hurt, a 5-star in the class of 2019 that everyone in the country is after. So Josh has a lot of insight on those two players that you will enjoy. I will apologize in advance. My audio isn't as good as normal. I had to record on my phone, not my microphone, so that is why. And you'll get to meet my daughter, who makes an appearance crying at one point in the episode. All right, here is our conversation with Josh Margolis. Hey, real quick, a word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events because with SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There really is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have SeatGeek on my phone, and it's by far the easiest way that I've found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and like I just mentioned, with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats to anything that I want to go to. I actually used SeatGeek to buy tickets earlier this year to see Yogi play here in Dallas. I bought my wife concert tickets for the summer. So SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. They save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. Now, here's how to get an even better deal, which is Podcast on the Brink listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. Download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K today, and you'll get $20 back from SeatGeek. That's promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. And now, on with this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. And we are joined on this episode of Podcast on the Brink by Josh Margolis, intern for Inside the Hall and the Assembly Call, and host of the Ball Isn't Life podcast. Josh, we've heard a lot about, Indiana getting involved with some kids in Minnesota. Obviously, Race Thompson has already committed, and Indiana's in some early discussions with Matthew Hurt, a 5-star up there, and Tom Ostrom has been given a lot of credit for that, given his deep roots in the state of Minnesota. But I'm wondering if we're overlooking the impact that you have had coming from Minnesota yourself. How much of this is due to your presence now on the Indiana beat?
It's a great question. You know what? Maybe I do have something to do with it. I don't know. But, Minnesota's been a hotbed for basketball for a while, and I think schools that don't go to the state to look at players and to get the lay of the land are missing out. And Indiana, I think, was under Crean, and they aren't anymore under Archie Miller and Tom Ostrom.
Alex, do you remember the last IU player from Minnesota? I hope I'm not forgetting anybody obvious, but I was trying to think, and I couldn't remember.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's probably something I'd need to research, but nobody in the recent memory comes to mind that came from the Minnesota area. Josh,
I can't think of anybody either.
I'm curious, Josh, when you went to this event this past weekend, obviously it was the second July evaluation period. Associate head coach Tom Ostrom was there, and D1 Minnesota hosted the event, so it wasn't like some of the other events that you've been to in terms of like the EYBL, the level of teams. But generally, how was the event in terms of competition, and kind of what did you see from both Race and Matthew Hurt?
In terms of competition, it was D1 Minnesota against everyone else, at least at the 17U level. I didn't get much of a look at the other age groups, but that's the team that Roy Williams came to see, that Patino, the younger Patino, came to see, along with several of his assistants, and then just like local schools like St. Cloud State, D2, D3 schools, NAIA schools came to see D1 Minnesota, maybe scoop up the guys that the high majors can't or don't want to offer, or the players don't end up going to, and it started off because it was sort of bracket. It went into bracket play. It was like one pool play game, and then went into bracket play. D1 Minnesota won both of their first two games. The first game was, I think, 112-46. They called the game with about 2 minutes left. Second game, a little closer. It was like a 40-point game. They called that one with a minute left. And progressively, the games got a little bit tighter. Sunday was a 3-game day, so they started with the quarters. Race Thompson wasn't supposed to play. He was nursing a few injuries. And coaches wanted to see him play for a little bit, get the chemistry right for the Vegas tournament coming up this weekend. And so he ended up playing for 2 games. The plan going into the weekend was not to have him play at all. And then it was to have him just play for 2 games. And then at the advice of his father, he did not play in the third game. Don't want to risk any injuries or anything like that. But in the games he did play, his shot not on point in terms of where I saw it, at the Battle of the Lakes back in May. But everything else solid. He throws some really nice outlet passes, plays hard defense, good in terms of verticality. Probably needs to build some muscle, which I think is going to be a benefit for him being a redshirt. He told me on the podcast that he really hasn't lifted weights much before. So that's another thing he has in common with me. But I don't think he will much longer. Cliff Marshall's going to change that. And, when Race Thompson fills out his frame, I think it's going to be a scary sight.
Hey, well, let's talk a little bit more about Race, Josh, because you spent some extended time, interviewing him. I highly recommend the interview that you did on the Ball Isn't Life podcast. I apologize. My daughter is crying in the background. But what was your biggest takeaway from the time that you spent talking with Race?
Just really, really humble. Does not like to talk about himself as much as, he likes to talk about others. Just a nice guy, likes to have fun. And a really solid basketball player, guy that, really wants to win, came from a competitive household. Everyone played sports in his family, including his father, Daryl, who's a Golden Gopher running back, held several records there, played for the Packers with Favre for a few years. So, he's a guy that is going to want to win. And redshirting, for him, it couldn't have been an easy decision because, he wants to get in and play right away. But he knows that he isn't quite ready for Big Ten basketball yet. But I think Indiana fans are going to enjoy having him on campus, enjoy watching him play once he gets started in the 18-19 season. And as for one more thing, the jersey number, he's been wearing 35 for a while, and it would be an issue if he didn't redshirt because Priller has that number, but it shouldn't be an issue because I believe Priller's a senior this upcoming season.
Josh, did you get any sense from Race for talking to him whether or not he's going to be able to finish up academically this summer and be able to come to campus in August? I know that's his plan, but I don't think it's ever been, I don't think he's ever said anything for sure, in terms of him graduating. Is that anything he talked about, or from talking to anybody this weekend, did you get any sense as to whether he's going to be able to get everything done in order to be on campus next month?
I feel like, he should. He's been talking. He mentioned the August 16th date for getting on campus, and I didn't talk that much to people about it, but I don't suspect that being an issue.
In terms of his game, is there any? You mentioned his strength and the weightlifting piece as something he's going to have to work on in order to be ready. And, I think a lot of people are excited about the redshirt year from the standpoint that he's going to get a full year in the system to kind of learn from the other players, be in practice, learn from the coaching staff, get himself acclimated. But from watching him as much as you have, I know you've watched him in an event prior to this too, so you've got a pretty decent base of opinion, and you've obviously seen from covering IU last year, you've seen different games in the Big Ten, different teams around the league. when you watch his game, are there anything specifically stand out as areas beyond the strength and getting stronger that he's really going to need to work on to be able to contribute when he's ready to go in that 2018-19 season?
One of the things he's mentioned that he needs to work on and he wants to one of his weak points that he wants to make a strength is guarding smaller players. And as a sort of wing player or 3 or 4 at 6'8", the ability to guard, smaller, possibly more athletic, agile players is going to be a must, especially in the Big Ten. And you get the feeling, playing against Big Ten guys, not, in game action, but in his redshirt year should help in that, and the coaching staff as well.
Josh, I want to ask you about Matt Hurt, who obviously is a 5-star prospect. I think Indiana fans are starting to get familiar with his highlight tapes, and they are quite impressive. And his recruitment should be an interesting one, obviously with Indiana involved early, and then the established relationship that he has with Race Thompson. What kind of sense do you get about kind of where that relationship is? How serious he might be considering Indiana early on, and if that friendship with Race Thompson might have any kind of impact on the decision that he makes about where to go to school?
I think it might have some impact. I don't think it will be the end-all, be-all by any means. His Matthew's older brother, Michael, currently goes to the University of Minnesota, and Matthew's the first 2019 guy offered by Duke. Also, a lot of interest from Louisville, North Carolina. So Indiana, it's not going to be an easy job by any means for Archie Miller and company to bring in Matthew. I think it's possible. If they do, they're going to get one heck of a player. But Matthew talked about he's going to visit Louisville and he might stop at IU on the way, make a visit. So if IU can nail a visit down there, I think it would go a long ways. But yeah, the friendship with Race should help. They're really close. Even when Race wasn't playing over on Friday and Saturday, he was, sitting on the bench right next to Matthew. They were chatting a lot, kind of feeding off each other. So yeah, they do have this really strong bond, and I could see it moving on to the next level. But it's entirely possible Matthew ends up going somewhere else.
How would you describe his game for someone who hasn't seen him play yet? Because I know when I watched him, the two names that came to mind in terms of former Hoosiers were Kirk Haston and Damon Bailey. Like, I saw elements of both of those guys' games in his, and a guy who's like 6'9", 6'10". How would you describe how he plays?
He can do a little bit of everything. He's much like Race. Strength is something that he says he wants to build up. But other than that, it's hard to find major weaknesses. He's got great handles. He can drive to the rim, loves to draw fouls, can block shots. I mean, most of the weekend playing against undersized guys, teams not up to the caliber of D1 Minnesota. But he was just absolutely dominant in the games he played. He can shoot from beyond the arc with consistency. He's got a nice jump shot. He has some post moves. Guarding multiple positions doesn't seem to be a problem for him. Can, run the transition game. It's hard to kind of find comparable players to him because, there really wasn't anyone on his level at the tournament this weekend. He put up like 30 and 16 in the title game, started one game, I think the semis, on a 7-0 personal run. So there's a lot of different elements to his game. I don't really want to, put a specific comparison on it. But he's a 5-star prospect for a reason. I'll say that.
Jerod, it's funny you mentioned those two guys. I was the first thing that came to mind to me when I watched the video, and I haven't, I've watched a lot of video, but when I was down in Dallas for the first April evaluation period, he was sitting out at that point, so I haven't seen him in person. But the first name that comes to mind to me, and I actually think he's a better version of this player, but in terms of style and play and some of the things he could do, there's some TJ Leaf in his game. That's one guy that I look at as a comparison. Josh, I'm curious from your perspective in terms of players coming out of Minnesota. You mentioned some of them. It's kind of been a hotbed, and really it should be based on the population in that area. It's Big Ten country. I'm curious. Some of the guys that you've seen come out of there have turned into really good players. Obviously, Rashad Vaughn, Tyus Jones, in recent years are two of the names that people will be really familiar with. But where in the hierarchy of Amir Coffey is another one, but where does Matthew Hurt rank in terms of high school recruits in recent memory from Minnesota? Does he have a chance to be the best player to come out of there in a long, long time?
In terms of, recent history and hype and build up and ranking, the only players I can think of on his level, Tyus Jones, Royce White, that's really it. I really can't think of anyone else on that level. And going back to the injury you mentioned, Indiana does have one advantage. Really, the only school that was in a lot of communication with Matthew's family. NCAA rules, they couldn't contact him directly during the time he was injured because he's a 19 guy. But Indiana offered him while he was injured, which he said meant a lot to him. So that's something to think about.
What's the someone that's from Minnesota, someone that that has followed basketball in that area? How do you compare interest in high school basketball and just basketball in general in that area? I know it's not on the same level as Indiana, but I guess what's the appetite and what's the interest level in high school basketball up in Minneapolis in that area?
It's not as widespread as in Indiana, but there's pockets where it's really big. Where I went to high school at Hopkins, where Amir Coffey played, where Royce White played, it's way bigger than football. The basketball season is the real sports season in high school. But in other schools, that's not the case. I think Minnesota continues to grow and become stronger as a state for high school basketball. Things like the Twin Cities Pro-Am that's going on right now is helping build the game. It's a free event in downtown Minneapolis. Guys like Tyus Jones are playing in it, and some freshman Mr. Basketball State of New York, Isaiah Washington, who is, I believe, like one of the founder of the term jelly, which is like when you finesse a layup, sort of. I don't know how to phrase it. I don't really know the lexicon 100%, but basketball's becoming up there. I wouldn't say with hockey at all, at least in the St. Paul side, but in terms of the state tournament, nowhere near the hype of hockey. Basketball is nowhere near that level, but it's really big in comparison to where it's been in the past. And Indiana's getting into the recruiting game in the state at the right time.
What's the level of pressure or scrutiny on Richard Pitino in terms of being able to keep a guy like Matthew Hurt in state? Is there, from Minnesota fans up there, are they expecting him to be a guy that they are in the mix with and have a chance to land? Because I know that those first couple of years up there, it was pretty rocky, and then he landed Amir Coffey, which was looked at as a huge recruiting win, obviously helped guide Minnesota's turnaround. But as these future classes go along, specifically with a guy like Hurt, how important is he to Minnesota, and how do fans view maybe whether or not they land him? Is it a bad sign if they don't get him, or are they looking at this like this kid's can go anywhere, so we're not really going to hold it against Richard Pitino if they can't land Matthew Hurt?
I don't think it's entirely comparable to the recruitment of Tyus Jones, because he made his decision shortly after Pitino was hired, so it was hard for fans to give Pitino a lot of flack because he really didn't have time to recruit there. But with Hurt, I think Minnesota has done a good enough job of getting top 5 guys in the state, guys like Daniel Oturu, who's going to come in a few years, Amir Coffey, you mentioned, that I don't think it would be devastating to the program if they didn't get Matthew Hurt. And I don't think, it won't be a killer to the program considering the momentum that was built last year, Pitino being named Coach of the Year, whether or not, you agree with the decision by the Big Ten to name him the Coach of the Year. He certainly improved from the season before and made that team competitive from the year before. They won maybe 2 conference games. and now they're expected to be top 3, top 4 in the Big Ten. So if they can keep getting highly ranked recruits and they don't end up getting Matthew Hurt, but they get a decent recruiting class in the 2019 year, I don't think it's going to be a huge knock on Pitino. At the same time, I think it's certainly plausible he ends up going to Minnesota, and wherever Matthew Hurt goes, that team is going to be really good. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, Josh, I know we only have a few minutes left with you because you're heading out to another basketball game tonight because you love basketball, clearly, going to see a Lynx game. What anything else jump out at you from this past weekend that we haven't talked about yet?
Not really. I'm trying to think, I guess. The level of competition, like not from this weekend, not nearly the same as like the EYBL circuit or anything, but to see the fan base in Minnesota, it was a pretty packed gym for the championship games, and the atmosphere was pretty good, I'd say. Just, I guess, hard to really find words to cap it off, but Indiana's doing the right thing by going after the state of Minnesota. It's already paid off with Race Thompson. And whether or not they get Matthew Hurt, I think you'll see several more guys from the state of Minnesota coming to IU.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. Check out Josh's interview with Race Thompson. You can find it at InsideTheHall.com. You can also search for Ball Isn't Life wherever you listen to podcasts, and you will find it. Josh, always a pleasure talking with you. Great work this week.
Thank you. I apologize if my voice is being drowned out. It's pouring outside, so sorry about that.
No, you sound good, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you for all your work. It was I know people that read the site were very appreciative of you being able to get out there, and I know they all enjoyed the interview with Race and obviously the content with Matthew as well. So appreciate it.
Yeah, the Indiana's push to recruit the state, not only paying dividends for the program, but for Inside the Hall and Assembly Call as well.
There we go.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We'll be back next week with another brand new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.